Hey guys, so what I wanted to talk to everybody about today, because you're so wonderful and amazing, I wanted to share some really good ideas with you about how I felt like we could do some great behavior, positive behavior management. I know that we all wish that we had some magic potion that we could throw at our kids and they would magically just behave. But what's important to remember is that when we are looking at our class, we are collectively trying to decide how we can best serve our kids, how they can learn in the most cohesive environment, and give ourselves some support to help that. So I'm going to give you some ideas of what I think is some great resources that I think that we can use, but I also want to make sure that we are collaborating and talking to each other about how we feel things are going to work best for our students. I do feel that it's not just one way that's going to be what's best, and that's why I want to provide different things. And what I'd like for us to do is I'd really like for us to try out different ways and try out these different things to see what works best. I also want to talk about what we can do together to share our ideas, but make it to where we are one cohesive thing. It is so important for us to be one united front when we're talking about the service that we're providing for behavior with our students. Behavior is one of those things that, as we know, it can be very challenging, and we have to find what works for each of our children, each of our students, so that all children have the access to the same types of education, and they feel safe and they feel happy and they want to be here. So I think that that's where I wanted to start today. Positive behavior plan is something that I feel strongly about, and I believe it can be successful for any grade level. Although the implementation may look different for different grade levels, I do believe that any school with any type of students can be best served using a positive behavior system. And in saying that, we have to make sure that we tailor our specific behavior plan or our behavior support system based on our children's needs. So what I wanted to talk about is that there's been a couple that I have researched and looked at to see what would be something that would work for our kiddos. And one of the things that I have found that to be successful is behavior contracts. And that is something that can go, you can tailor it to wherever from K to 12 and make it to where these students, number one, it provides an expectation for the students so that they know exactly what it is that we're expecting from them. There's no room for wiggle room, no room to say, well, I didn't know that kind of thing, where each student, kind of like the code of conduct that we have the parents and students sign at the beginning of the school year, but this would be something more specific to that student. And it may be something that we would decide upon after a little bit of time in the classroom and getting to know and observing our students. I feel like this is a good resource because it is a way that we can individualize the students and their needs, but it's broad enough that we can apply what each of those students needs to be able to create this positive behavior system. So I want you to start thinking about ways in which we could implement that and how that might look in your classroom. Once we brainstorm some ideas and we get these things kind of in one place, then we can look at molding and making our own. I feel like it's really important for this piece to collaborate with others in your grade level, subject areas, so that we can make sure that although it's going to be across the board, it may look just a little bit different what your behavior contract is, the vocabulary that you're going to use, how you're going to assess that. And that's going to be based because a kindergartner is not going to need the same things, or they may require more than what maybe a fifth grader may need. So that's why I think it's important that we look at these across grade bands, but across subject areas and things like that, to just make sure that we're doing everything we can to ensure the needs of the students are being met. Also, we have to think about tools that we can use as once we've developed our behavior system and once we've decided, okay, this is what we're going to look for, this is how we're going to reward, or this is how we're going to give the consequences for whatever behavior that may be. And so using the technology, the 21st century, is one of the best ways that we can go ahead and share ideas across the grades, across the subjects, to me, to other supervisors, to the county. It's a good way to have data-driven instruction types of behavior so that we can see what are we doing great at, what are things we need to work on, what are things that our students struggle with the most. And so using all of the different types of technology that's out there that we have access to is a great way. One of the things that I really like is using things that people have used in the past to find success in their classroom. And I think that understanding that everybody's thoughts and ideas may be different with this. I think if we had one thing and one type of app or application that is going to be able to give us that data that we want to see. It also, what happens is it gives the students the ability to see their growth, to see where they are struggling, to see the things that they're doing well, and it gives them a an exact, right at that time, kind of picture of how they're being successful. And that's really good for students to be able to see that. It gives them that positive reinforcement immediately if we're doing that. What I did when I taught elementary school is I noticed that we used a program where you could go in there and you taught the skills at the beginning of the school year. You gave the students the instructions about this is what it's going to look like, this is the program that we're going to use, and they then had the practice and understanding of what that might look like. So once they were able to understand what the expectations were, and this is the program that we were going to use, they knew that at any time during instruction, during in the hall, during their exploratories, during any time, those teachers had access to this system. And what these teachers were doing were using the expectations that were already set forth, and they were assessing them on those. And it may not be every time, it may be not every class, it may be not every expectation. It just depends. But a teacher would use their time to quickly assess things. If, let's say, we were in the hallway, and one of the rules for the school is we don't talk in the hallway. Well, they are not going to say, hey, I'm getting ready to assess you if you're talking in the hallway. They're just going to go down the line and they're going to click on each student that is following the rule, or those that are not. If they're noticing other things, they can go in there and they can, have the points. And what happened was the students began to know that noise. That noise was the ding when they did something wrong, or dong when they weren't doing something. And it wasn't always where the teacher would say to the specific student, hey, Johnny, you're off task. I need you to get off task. You're losing a point. A lot of times what would happen is, what I would observe was that teachers would go through and they would just be walking around while the students were working in their groups or working independently, or even during the lesson, and the teacher would just kind of, okay, this is what I'm noticing. And what you would notice is with the students is when they would hear that dong, for that negative behavior that the teachers observed, they would almost self-assess to say, okay, hold on, was I doing something I wasn't supposed to do? And many times, a student that was doing that behavior that you didn't want them to do, they would self-correct themselves most times. Now, you're always going to have challenging behaviors that is not always going to be immediately changed with those things, and you assess those things as necessary. But what I find important is that we can't just choose that we're going to do things within our school to help with our behavior. We can't choose, oh, I'm going to pick that, and that's what I'm going to use for the class, or I'm going to pick that. So it's something that we have to do as a system, as a whole group, so that there's consistency amongst the students. And we have to make sure that we're using research-based types of things so that we know that there's success out there. So I have gone through and I have looked at different types of things. There's things called Hero K-12. That's something that has been successful. There's research that suggests, positive reinforcement is one of those things that's important. I'm going to send you guys an email with a list of behavior resources that I found. You're going to find different types of behavior plans or behavior options that we can look at. There's also going to be things where it just talks about what are some things we can be looking for and expectations that we should set forth for our students. It'll give resources about how do you manage your classroom? What are some things that you can do differently? Reflective things that you may look at to make sure that we're doing all we can for our students. One of the things that I really liked was Class Dojo. Class Dojo is kind of what I was talking about, where you could go in there and click the positive or the negative. But also what that Class Dojo does inside of that is it gives you an overall picture of that student's weekly, daily, monthly, all of those things, where you can wrap them up and you can really see not just what are the behaviors they struggle with more, but when are they happening? Are there specific days of the week? Are there specific days and times that they are doing? And then you can see that and you can show that to them and say, okay, what is happening during these times that you continue to struggle with being out of your seat? And that's where it comes in, where the simplicity of making sure that you only have a set of solid rules that you're looking at. Because if you get into too many things for kids, too specific needs, it's going to be more difficult to assess those to see exactly. Because maybe one day Johnny didn't raise his hand before he went to the pencil sharpener, but he asked permission. You have to be careful in that. So I want you guys to read through. There's going to be a list of 20 things that I found that I find that would add value to our school. There's also something called a teacher kit, and this is another classroom management tool that I think would be really cool. It doesn't just do behaviors, but it also does absences, and it gives that real-time update. It incorporates that 21st century focus that we definitely are. Also, the part of that, this teacher kit, also Class Dojo, it involves the parents, so the parents can create an account and they can actually look into that, and they can see, okay, what's my kid doing? How are they doing today? And it's not, waiting for a progress report or waiting for a note home, because sometimes kids, if they get in trouble, they may or may not have that. And sometimes parents want to check in on their kids during the day when they can't necessarily take a phone call. Obviously, if there's major issues, a phone call would be necessary. But if it's something where they just wanted to take note to discuss with their student later, that would be something. It's very colorful also, so it's something that would be really resourceful as well. I think too that it's important as educators and that we not only decide what are we going to do to help promote positive behavior, but what drives the behavior behind the students that are struggling. And I think reading some books, there's a book called The Little Book of Restorative Discipline for Schools. This is a book that provides just different ways to create positive environments in a school. And although we don't like to use the word discipline or negative reinforcement, sometimes there has to be consequences, for the behaviors in which we're seeing that are not cohesive to what we're doing and what's cohesive for learning. So this book finds a balance between figuring out what rewards and discipline are. And I think too that's why it's important that we decide what's best for our students, because each classroom, each grade, every student is individual. And I think that when you're able to tailor things to a student's needs, they're going to be more successful. And then there's also a book called The Behavior Toolkit, and this is just something that talks about struggles that happen in the classroom, and that classroom discipline that we had maybe 10 or 15 years ago, even 5 years ago, is not the same discipline that we have today. So those are things, that's where we have to adjust what we need. And that's why I wanted to hold this meeting, so that we could talk about that and really focus, because although we do a lot of great things, I want to focus on the future, and I want to focus on what we can do to improve, because I want to offer the very best for our students, because well-behaved students in a well-behaved classroom are going to be more successful than those where there's a lot of problem behavior.